7.5 million people at the beginning of this week lost their either extended or expanded or really created unemployment benefits, right? We have 3 different programs going on there. There was the federal supplement for unemployment, $300 on a weekly basis. There was an extension in terms of like weeks. And there was also unemployment for people who don't normally qualify for unemployment because they are supposed independent contractors. If you're working like a gig job, you're not paying into unemployment insurance, or your employer is not. Here is Laura Ingraham, though still perpetuating the lie that this money was the reason why unemployment numbers haven't gone down, or I should say, that there are jobs that have not been filled.
That's even with the vaccines that Trump delivered. Biden's answer is, of course, just to blame the red states, then to push booster shots and throw masks at the problem. Well, none of it's really working. It's a virus, and it's gonna virus. Meanwhile, the only curve Biden seems to have flattened is job growth. Job openings hit a record high of 10.9 million back in July, but there's no one to fill them thanks to what I like to call Biden bucks. The mailbox money that keeps going out to those finicky workers who've gotten used to couch surfing and ordering from DoorDash. For example, an estimated 50% of small business owners in Indiana reported that they could not fill job openings last month, a record high. Unfilled job openings across the state are far above the 48-year historical average of 22%.
Now, we should say that the Wall Street Journal, I think it was Forbes, both had articles recently that showed that despite the fact in those states where they ended the federal unemployment extensions, the unemployment rate didn't change. Barely budged. One study, I think, showed that actually people's unemployment rates dropped more in states that still offered unemployment benefits than those that didn't. But let's just call it a wash.
Yeah, unemployment rate gonna unemployment rate.
And
it really is amazing to see like all these, you just look at those charts that basically show the number of cases going up and the number of deaths going up. And we're just acting like this is all over when honestly, it looks like it's about, in some states it is at its worst, but it looks like it may very well be its worst in these upcoming months. It is stunning that we're just going to will ourselves to believe that the pandemic is over when for certain parts of this country, it's never been more deadly.
I can't believe virus gonna virus, as if that is viruses notoriously.
We don't have an ability to stop any.
Yeah, we can intervene against viruses. That's a thing we do as a society.
I wonder if she's taken the vaccine. I wonder why.
Well, she
would have done that.
Washes her hands after going to the bathroom or before she eats. Because viruses are going to virus. I wonder if she's just like, I'm coming into work. I don't care what you say. Virus is going to virus. It's this insistence that punishing people is the only possible way that we might incentivize our society is both fatalistic and amazingly, again, going back to the caller, that the idea that, by punishing school children, that making crimes more criminal or whatever, by increasing their punishment for them, that we're going to somehow improve the moral standing of our society, even to all of the evidence to the contrary, right? The idea that the punitive approach is so legitimate that the real criminology that you can look into and read that tells you it doesn't work. Punishing people, the death penalty doesn't work as a disinterrent or whatever, doesn't work. It's just ignored in favor of this hegemonic impulse to punish people because they might be doing the wrong thing or lazy or manipulating the system. It's all very counterproductive, but it just passes for the obvious logical scientific approach, in face of all of those graphs that they put up. Well, I think first off, I think that approach is religious. Frankly, it's founded on religious principles. Oh yeah. But the other element of this is that in one breath,
they will talk about the idea that requiring people to wear masks, or if they want to go into a restaurant or a concert hall or something like this, or requiring vaccines, to get on an airplane, is a loss of freedom. But it is okay to deprive people of support to eat or to live in a house so that they are forced to go take a crappy job that they don't want. That's not an infringement on freedom. Well, I mean, this is a fascinating dynamic. It's like, on one hand, like, coercion is reprehensible if it involves like engaging in luxury activities, but coercion is perfectly fine if it's about survival.
Right. Well, one affects them and one doesn't. That's what it comes down to. Like, they don't want to go to the concert in their in their town and have to wear a mask, but they're not the ones worried about their unemployment benefits running out.
And this is the thing. I think that's why I think it is very helpful to talk about these things as all being a function or an attempt to coerce. I think it's like lay it all out there. This is an attempt to infringe upon your freedom, if you want to say, to go into a restaurant or to go to, the museum or wherever it is. This is an infringement on your freedom. And it is designed to coerce you to wear a mask or to get vaccinated. And then the same should be made explicitly clear that we need to keep you in a, sort of like treading water, so that you are forced to go in and work at a job that you're not interested in working at. And let's lay it out there and say, like, all the cards are on the table. And there's no principle associated with this. There is, like, what do we as a society choose to incentivize people to do? Or what do we choose to coerce people to do? The coercion exists. This whole sort of libertarian fantasy that there's some type of free market or there's some type of society where
country on earth, man.
Yeah, where coercion doesn't exist, or freedom. You know what that word means? Like, no, freedom. It doesn't. I'm sorry. When you define freedom as that you're not in any way influenced by what's going on in society, guess what? Freedom doesn't exist. That freedom is fantasy land. It's like for seventh graders.
Well, they view it as, they do the right thing. So freedom is what they earn by doing the right thing. Because, we see it all the time where, if a poor person receives food stamps, the government should mandate what they can and cannot buy with those food stamps, because they think that those people should be punished for not, in their mind, doing the right thing. They're not paying their end of the bargain in their own view, whatever it may be. For them, they say, oh, they're successful, they're rich, they pay their taxes, they have money, they're doing the right thing. You can't tell them what to do. I mean, at least that's what how I think they view it, or at least the ones that are smart enough to view it that way. Because to me, the real depressing thing are the people who are in those positions and should be having solidarity with the people who receive unemployment benefits. Many people themselves who are receiving those unemployment benefits, watching Fox News and saying, yeah, I agree. They're talking about you.
I deserve the benefits, but those other people, they don't. They're just ordering DoorDash.
Right. I mean, right. I definitely agree. And I think just take a little bit further too, in America, although it goes unstated, a lot of, times freedom just interpreted through the lens of, competition and domination. And we're taught that, like, freedom, your freedom to do X, either must or does inherently infringe upon someone else's freedom to do Y. And so put in those terms of put this conversation in those terms, a lot of them feel like, my freedom is being impinged upon if I wear a mask. And that makes me sort of like the social minority, the person who's being oppressed. And instead, I would like to exercise my freedom and instead, choose to do something like not wear a mask, not get vaccinated, not only that, but not have people point out that what I'm doing is impacting not only the public health, but like their health personally, because ultimately I believe that my freedom should supersede theirs. Their freedom to not get sick, especially when we can't can't, in their minds tie such a direct connection between me being sick, me not wearing a mask, me being unvaccinated, me practicing that type of freedom, and other people getting sick by, not being allowed to, in my mind, demand anything from me. And it ultimately is just not a functional definition of freedom, because it creates these situations where people, ideologically feel like they're not free enough unless somebody else is being like trolled or being like triggered or something. Like that's just the only way they can experience their freedom in some sense, because it has to include the domination of another type of person in order to for them to feel as though they're practicing it properly. And I think we see that a lot when it comes to trans bathroom issues too, like the freedom of a trans person to use the bathroom that they identify with, that they feel more comfortable with, and is somehow impinging upon the freedom of some other person to go to the bathroom without having to think about those things or think about politics or whatever. And ultimately, until we move past a version of freedom that exists in a lot of people's heads that looks like that towards one that is more dynamic, I guess you have the freedom to play your music in your own apartment or house as loud as you want and inconvenience all your neighbors, but you're not going to do that because we live in a society. We're going to always have these holdouts that feel like the only way they can actually be, in the freest country in the world is if they have a bunch of people under them, whatever that situation might call for it. Sorry for ranting there a little bit.
Yeah, well, yeah, and it's also it's also more than just how they feel. It's they need people to be coerced. You need people to teach. I need you to teach my unmasked kid, or I need you to get your ass to Olive Garden to serve me breadsticks.
Because our economy also functions like that. One of the biggest promises to the upper middle class, whether you're talking about the upper middle class in urban centers or the sort of rural upper middle class who owns all the land and dynasty, is that you may not be on top, you may not be in the top 1% of earners or billionaires or I guess Elon Musk, but there's still going to be this population of people, of Americans, of underclass who are worse off than you, who you get to play Lord over. The big appeal of living in New York City is that you get to go to rooftop bars and, go to other amenities that require there to be underclass of permanent servants that we pretend are transitory, our 16-year-olds with their first job or whatever. But we know, it's a caste system more or less. And without that, the whole house of cards that is the American capitalist sort of system in people's what the benefit is in people's minds just falls apart. And so we just have a system entirely built around this sadomasochism that says you should be deferential online and always defend Elon Musk and then tip your server poorly because that's the only way you can get your rocks off here. And it's just all very counterintuitive to fighting a pandemic.
The perfect encapsulation of that was in April of last year at the height of the lockdowns. And there were all those anti-lockdown protests that were spreading all over the country. When I mean spreading over the country, I mean a handful of people literally flying over the country to make it seem like there were a lot of people. Brandon Straka, he was one of those type of guys. But the perfect encapsulation of that was, they were talking, the right-wing media was covering it as, people need to get to work. They're running out of, they're starving. They need to buy food, pay their rent, take care of their families. But the people who were going to these things, those weren't who they were, because they were at these lockdown protests holding signs saying I demand to get a haircut and things like that. The people who actually were suffering were actually the people who were staying home because they didn't want to die, because they actually cared about themselves and the people they live with and the people in society. It was those selfish people who did have means, who weren't really suffering, but they wanted their hair cut. Their hair was getting a little bit too long and they demanded their barber or their hairdresser get back to work and serve them.
But Matt, what about the landlords? Now, you might say, landlords who are unable to collect rent from their tenants might instead, organize with those tenants in their own self-interest to lobby the government for more general housing assistance. But if they did that, they wouldn't be able to play landlord. They would have to acknowledge that they're workers. They have to acknowledge that they're being cucked by the system too. And so
I wouldn't call them workers, but
you know what I'm saying. They're not workers. Obviously, they're they're not the 1%. They're not at the highest level of capitalism in terms of being able to actively live outside of this level of precarity. And I'm talking about the baby landlords as they describe themselves, not what we know the actual landlords in America are, which is BlackRock.
And the most amazing thing about that is them going and blaming the government for not helping them, and them being the landlords and paying the rent of their tenants so their tenants can stay there, that would be the most immediate way for them to basically, get whatever debt is owed to them. But instead of doing that, they'd rather go after their tenants, go after them for money they don't have, try to evict them, really seriously putting themselves in a position where they're obviously not going to probably get someone to fill that room right away. But they'd rather do that to their own detriment because, like what you just said,
it's not always to their own detriment, because once you get tenant A out, tenant B comes in with a 10% or 20% or 30% or 40% raise in rent, right? I mean, you have a lot more flexibility to raise that rent in that instance. But yes, I mean, largely, I think there's a lot of that is to maintain their status.
I want to make sure I don't come across as defending landlords. My larger point, not that anyone's saying I was, but my own internal instinct is to make sure that that's very understood. My only larger point is that you have these middle manager types, either literally or in their own, in their own heads, who presume themselves to be different than like the 99% of us who are going to probably live in debt for the rest of their, our lives. And, a lot of that illusion is maintained by all of the service economy and the existence of people running around to like hand you money for things you don't deserve.
Brandon, at the end of this episode, the one quote from this entire show today that's going to go around social media is "Landlords are workers."
If I get dragged for that, I deserve to get dragged for that. That was unforgivable misspeak.
Folks, there's more of what you've just saw where that came from. That's if you hit the subscribe and like button. Thank you. Really, thank you.